Hi, my name is Andy Lukovich, and today I will be doing a presentation on recognizing a common security void, a review in how user behavior analysis fills the security gap left by passwords. First, I'd like to look at the CIA triad and how password and user behavior analysis fit into the triad itself. For confidentiality, you have the passwords, and these, of course, keep the data secure. It'll make sure that only people who are authorized to see the data can see it as long as they have the correct credentials. For integrity, you've got your user behavior analysis, and we're going to go further into why this is the case, but briefly, user behavior analysis helps to ensure that the data you are looking at is exactly what you expect it to be and has not been tampered with. Looking first at confidentiality, we're going to talk about passwords and other forms of authentication. While there are numerous forms out there, I'm just going to be looking at the five most common. First, we're going to look at traditional passwords, and this is generally what people think of when they hear password. This is a text field that is required the user to enter a certain number of characters. These are upper or lowercase letters, numbers, or special characters. The format is usually determined by the source, but again, it's just a series of sequential characters that will unlock access to whatever data that the user is trying to get to. The second form is what's known as knowledge-based passwords. Perhaps a better way to call it is phrase-based passwords. These are the kinds of security questions like on what street did you grow up on? Who was your first teacher? What was your mother's maiden name? It's a question that only somebody in theory should who's trying to access should know the answer to because it's going to be specific to that person. Next, you have biometrics, and this is where you start getting into the sci-fi realm. This is your fingerprint readers, your iris scans. Basically, it is authentication using a part of your body that has to be on your person, and again, would be totally unique to each person. Then you've got the USB and the tokens. And I lump this together because the concept is identical for both pieces. It's a device you've got to have on you that is required to authenticate and gain access. On the left, bottom left, you've got a token which generates a 6-digit number that changes every 30 seconds to 1 minute. Uh, During the time, you have to enter what's in the display, and if you don't enter it within that time limit, it changes and you've got to enter it again. The other is a USB version. In this case, this is what's called a YubiKey. And the idea with this one is you've got it inserted in the USB drive and it contains the password itself. You can only access your data as long as this key is placed in the USB drive. But in all other ways, it acts just like your traditional password. Finally, you've got two-factor authentication. And this is a combination of the previous four, requiring at least two of them. Usually, you're going to see a traditional password combined with either a knowledge-based password or a token. Basically, you need to have both items in order to authenticate. And if you're missing either one of them, you will not be able to gain access. To sum it up, the whole point behind passwords and other forms of authentication is to preserve the confidentiality of the data and prevent its compromise. Looking at the compromise, though, we're going to see that happens in basically two different ways. When it comes down to it, compromise can really be broken into two different categories. First, you've got your overt form of compromise. This is your denial of service attacks, mysterious windows popping up, or windows in your browser opening up to pages that they should not be opening to. It is something very obviously wrong that is easily detected by anybody looking at and does not even really need any special tools to detect. This is where in the past most of your attacks were coming from. Then you've got your covert form of compromise. This is a relatively new version where somebody has gotten into your network and you don't know about it because they've kept a very low profile. There are various ways people can implement covert compromises, and we're going to take a look at that in a minute. But the main idea behind it is they've compromised your network in such a way that the tools are not going to detect it. When you do have that form of compromise, so the covert form of compromise is a very dangerous form, and at first look, it is not going to be easily detected until it's too late. But there are tools out there designed to look for it, and those tools, one category of those tools is called user behavior analysis. The way user behavior analysis works is it focuses on creating a baseline of normal activity. It watches the network, it sees how its users act on a day-to-day basis, and determines this is what normal activity looks like. Once it's determined what normal activity looks like, it can start looking for abnormal activity. Abnormal activity can take numerous forms, such as late night activity for a user logging on, let's say 1 o'clock, 2 o'clock in the morning, when generally that person only logs on between 8 a.m. to 5 p.m. Then you've got activity where a machine is reaching out to an unusual IP or domain, perhaps to a country that there is no reason why activity should be touching, like Russia or China. A third example would be moving data around a network. This is just some form of activity, especially in large chunks, that this user would not normally do. This is what user behavior analysis is looking for, just out of the ordinary normal activity. User behavior analysis is a relatively new concept and set of tools, and by new, within the last 5 years or so. This has to do with the evolution from the traditional network security method. That method focused on service-side exploits. What it really means is it was perimeter-based security. The assumption was if you're going to be attacked, it's going to come from the outside looking in. So it's going to hit those perimeter devices like your firewall or publicly facing servers and try to gain access through that way. Those kind of attacks included your denial of services, your vulnerability exploits, or password cracking. The key here is a lot of these attacks, or the majority of these attacks, are very noisy, and you knew when they were happening. You may not be able to prevent them, but you at least knew they were happening, and you could do some form of post-exploit action. But that's when the malicious actor decided to change their tactics. Taking a cue from the legend of the Trojan horse, malicious actors began to change their method on how they were attacking a network. Gone were the days of just trying to brute force their way in looking for some kind of crack or exploit, and instead they decided to be invited in. This form of attack became known as social engineering, and the most popular form of social engineering became known as phishing. Phishing generally takes the form of some kind of email sent legitimately into the network that has some kind of exploit attached to it. Now, this could be a link or a document in the email that entices the user or the person reading it to click the link or document. Once that is done, that will download the compromise onto their machine, gaining them access to the network. This is done quick and silently and is generally very hard to detect. The reason why social engineering became wildly successful is because it exploits a key idea that passwords will always protect your data, when in reality, passwords only create a form of complacency. Passwords are bypassed using social engineering. When the user clicks the link or opens up the document, they've already opened up their access with their own passwords. It doesn't matter if it was a traditional, a token, or two-factor authentication. By the time they've clicked the link, they've already authenticated themselves on the network. That exploit will then either create some form of persistence that will allow the malicious actor to gain access whenever they want to, or it will instantly transfer the data out of the network before the connection is closed. This is where user behavior analysis comes into play. User behavior analysis is always assuming that there is or can be compromise on your network. And as discussed previously, it was already looking for that abnormality in what it knows is normal traffic. Ultimately, user behavior analysis is a companion tool that should be used alongside other forms of security like the password. Passwords provide a form of security by slowing down an attacker and forcing them to have to deal with this lock on the data. However, as we stated earlier, that lock can be picked or bypassed. In this case, user behavior analysis will make sure that if somebody were to get through that password, that there would be some form of monitoring to let the analysts know that that compromise has happened. The way it does that is it doesn't care about users or user rights. What it cares about is the activity that it's used to seeing from these users. However, it is not a silver bullet solution. User behavior analysis has to be taught what is right and wrong. It is like an infant child. It cannot automatically do everything that an adult can do. It's got to be taught, it's got to be trained. This takes both time and money and a lot of perseverance to get it to work correctly. However, when it is set up correctly, it is a great tool to ensure that integrity is maintained on your network. Also, that confidentiality of the passwords is in place, which ultimately allows for availability of that data. I would like to thank you for listening to my presentation. I hope you learned a few things about user behavior analysis and has encouraged you to look a little further into it. I hope that you did not get the idea that I thought passwords or any forms of authentication were bad. I think they are incredibly important. However, it must be understood that there is a level of flaw that goes along with passwords, and ultimately, user behavior analysis can help right that flaw and make it negligible. Thank you very much.